Hey there, I'm Matt, and today I'm going to be painting up another miniature from the Super Dungeon Explorer core box. This time it's going to be the Ember Mage, and we're going to be working on color transitions. Let's get started. The first thing that I noticed about this model is that the staff crosses over the center of her body, and her head made it a little difficult to access the area around the shoulders, so I set out to separate the pieces. I got this set secondhand, and the previous owner had superglued all the parts together already, so I had some difficulty popping off her head. But it had to be done, you see. Off with her head. Well, I ended up failing to take off the head for now, but I started painting anyway. For my reference photo this time, I chose the concept art for Jessica from Dragon Quest VIII. Her color scheme is similar to the art for the Ember Mage, but with a couple of subtle color differences that I wanted to try here. I started by base coating all of the skin with Kislev Flesh. I normally don't like the Kislev Flesh color unless it's being used for, well, Kislevites and burly soldier guys, because it acts more like a tanned color rather than a normal medium skin tone. I like to use Steel Legion Drab to start off darker skin tones, and Reaper's Rosy Skin for lighter skin, so Kislev Flesh sits kind of in an awkward place, particularly for some anime characters. But after using it for the Royal Paladin and being happy with the results, I decided to give it a shot here. While waiting for the first coat to dry, I painted all of the cloth except the trim with Corn Red, and then coated the trim with Fenrisian Grey. Along the way, I kept trying to pull off her head without much success. Next up, all of the cloth on her top, as well as her legs, got a treatment of Nagaroth Night Purple. At this point, the camera had to be turned away as I committed a heinous act of violence against the poor Ember Mage. After her head was separated from her shoulders, I could more easily paint the parts that were being blocked by the hair. With these chibi models, I like to paint the head separately, so that I can focus on the details and expressions without worrying that when I paint the body, some wandering paint might ruin it. Unfortunately now I had to clean up some of the areas where I had scraped off some paint from viciously decapitating the model. I was actually surprised how little paint rubbed off considering how rough I had to be to get the parts separated. With everything cleaned up, I used some Averland Sunset to paint the corset and base coated the hair with Doombolt Brown. I initially used Fenrisian Grey on the decoration on the cloth because it was similar to the color of the white underlayer of Jessica's skirt. However, I wasn't happy with how the colors were interacting with the theme of a fire mage, so I searched for some other images. I didn't want to use a golden yellow because I was hoping to move away from duplicating the original concept art. My first thought when it came to fire magic was the Mistress of Explosion herself, Megamin from Konosuba. However, she was also using a golden yellow trim on her outfit, so that was a no too. In the end, I tried some Emperor's Children pink on one line of trim, and I was much happier. In fact, I decided to do a bit of a gradient between the bluish gray to pink on the top of the hood and edges of the cloak, which felt a little bit more like a magical combination, while also fitting with the more cutesy aesthetic of the model. While waiting for that to dry, I got to washing. I started with some FW Burnt Umber ink to shade all of the red. For bright blood red, I like to shade with a dark brown, but for more rosy red, I prefer purple. Then I washed the trim with some indigo ink to get the dark blue into the runes. I also used the burnt umber ink on the legs to turn the dark purple into something closer to a black, while still trying to take color inspiration from Jessica. And I used a little bit to tint the skin, since I wanted to build back up to that original Kislev flesh. From there, I got to building up those reds. I first went over the cloth areas that I shaded with brown with a first layer of corn red, leaving the deepest folds and underside of the bend of the hood that darker shade. I didn't try to get too consistent with the color here, since I was going to be building up to a lighter shade anyway. While waiting for that to dry, I jumped over to the trim to clean up the pink where the blue wash tinted it a little too much, making sure to draw around the runes. Still jumping around, I added a first layer of Kislev flesh to all of the skin. Since I didn't wash any of the purple, I went straight to highlight layers by mixing some Xerius purple into the original shade and finishing it off by then getting some pure Xerius purple onto the top ridges of cloth and a tiny bit on the legs where they were poking out from under the cloak. With most of the cloth done, I cleaned up the corset and then freehand penciled in some strings with some Eshin Gray. This bit isn't too noticeable unless you really examine the model, but it also didn't take too long. The red then got highlighted up with a mix of Corn Red and Evil Sun's Scarlet, finished up with a final highlight of pure Evil Sun's Scarlet and some Wild Rider Red on the top ridges. I gave a quick coat of Steel Legion Drab on the boots, and with that the body was all finished up. To start the head, I first cleaned up the bottom where it connects to the neck, and cleaned up the edges where the hair meets the skin. With my finer detail brush, I coated the eyes with Ulthuan Grey, the same way I did with the Royal Paladin. This took 2 coats, so in the meantime I put another layer of Kislev flesh on the face, and coated the mouth area with the dark purple Nagaroth Night. I lightened up the cheeks and the bridge of the nose with a mix of Kislev flesh and Flayed One flesh, and started working on the iris, with that purple complementing her clothing. The eyes on this model are much more vertical than horizontal, which is somewhat uncommon for anime eyes. So I decided to make the iris occupy most of the eye to make her a bit more dreamy-eyed. I finished them up by adding Xerius Purple for the highlight on the lower part of the iris, using Rhinox Hide to dot the pupils, and Ulthuan Grey for the reflection dots. The most difficult part about this process was making sure that both irises were about the same size, since the eyes themselves were modeled slightly differently. It took some going back and forth between the eyes to ensure that they were even and she didn't look cross-eyed. Then I finished off the mouth with Corn Red for the tongue and Ulthuan Grey for the top row of teeth. To highlight up the hair to that bright orange shade, I mixed Wild Rider Red into my Doombolt Brown, and finished it off with a final highlight of pure Wild Rider Red, trying to freehand some vertical streaks of hair to add a bit more detail. Then, with the face pretty much done, I superglued it down to the body so I could work on the hood and the back of the hair again. While waiting for that work to dry, I got started on the staff by base coating it with Rhinox Hide Brown. Between coats, I started to work on the base, giving everything that coat of Eshin Gray, just like I did for the base of the Royal Paladin. For the stick of the staff, I went with a slightly orangish Mournfang brown that I thought might complement the hair. I gave the hands the flesh treatment and then washed the whole thing with a bit of thinned down burnt umber ink. The next step on the base was a 50-50 mix of Eshin Grey and Fenrisian Grey on the surface of the stones. Even though the paint was a little patchy and didn't go on well in one coat, I left a bit of the patchiness as variation in the stone color. I also took this opportunity to clean up the stones on the base of the Glimmerdusk Ranger who I had painted before starting this series, and wanted her to match the rest of the heroes. The final detail was to go along the edge of each of the stones with pure Fenrisian Grey, making sure not to get it in those dark cracks. Now, my original plan was to try to do some lighting effects coming off the gem of the staff, but I was losing a bit of steam and decided to finish up by gluing the staff onto the body. The gem was painted with Averland Sunset, and then the rest of the staff was cleaned up with Mournfang Brown. While waiting for those to dry, I treated the hood to the same reds that I used on the cloak, and painted the base rims with the matching corn red. I tried to find a way to treat each character as a different player character color, with the paladin as blue, the mage is red, the dwarf is going to be yellow, and the ranger is green. So I painted the mage's base rim with corn red. It's a dark enough red that I feel it doesn't detract too much from the model, and it complements the color scheme we chose. All that was left was to finish up the staff by cleaning up the Mournfang Brown on the wood, and adding some highlight to the gem with Iriel Yellow, doing an orb of lighting in the direction it was pointing, and a little bit of an arc on the opposite side. And with that, the Ember Mage was complete. With this model, the thing I found the most challenging was finding a way to give the character some personality beyond just the fire red scheme. It took a little while to figure out, but I'm happiest with how the pink and blue trim adds a bit more depth to her characterization. I never really ended up doing much of the lighting effects, so that's definitely something I'll add to the challenge list for a future miniature. I wanted to go a bit further with these characters because they're the ones the players are going to be looking at the most, and they'll be examining them to choose which one to play as. You might be thinking, this was a lot of work on a single figure, and if you're just getting started with painting, I can see how all of the extra layers and shades and highlights might be intimidating at first. Feel free to stop anywhere along the way you feel comfortable. Maybe just a base coat and some details in the eyes is enough for you, and that's perfectly acceptable. As long as you're enjoying the painting process, that's all that matters. If you enjoyed watching me paint up the Ember Mage, then first of all, thank you so much for watching. If you subscribe to my YouTube channel here, then you'll get to see me paint up the rest of this core box for Super Dungeon Explorer. And if you want to see me paint these miniatures live, you can check me out at Twitch at twitch.tv/microtonalmatt. The link will be in the description below. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.